All right, can you hear me? There we go. So, I don't know about you guys, but I spend a lot of time trying to avoid Google's tentacles. Google's tracking cookies, Google reading my email. And I have an Android phone, but I try to minimize my footprint on Android. So there's a number of, I'm used to thinking of Google as the problem. Oh, and before I go any further, I should say, if there is anyone in the audience who is active duty military or has a clearance, you want to leave the room now, and you want to come back in the room in about 3 minutes. I have only one slide now in this deck that will cause you to have to do paperwork. And if you need a clean deck afterwards, I can provide it. So, any takers? Right on. So, who recognizes this? Anybody? Bueller? About a year ago, there was in one of the Snowden revelations was that the NSA was actually tapping the data center links between Google's data centers, where traffic passes in the clear, and basically adding and removing the encryption protecting that traffic. So I don't know what smartass thinks that's funny, but clearly somebody does. So I decided, okay, my reaction is pretty much like the guy at Google who discovered this. Fuck these guys. I know there are a lot of hardworking, intelligent people at the NSA who are working to protect the internet and the communications over the internet. And I know that because I have the privilege of serving in a standards group alongside many of them. So I'm not here to tell you that everybody at the NSA is an asshole, but I am here to tell you that I think a certain amount of them are. And I got pretty pissed off about this, but it was one of those situations where really, A, how are you going to know if you are being surveilled, if your systems are being compromised? And B, what the hell are you really going to be able to do about it? So I'm kind of in this background radiation state of annoyance, right? I know that Google is watching everything I do. Now we know that the NSA is watching everything we do. What really happened, though, what really pissed me off was that over Christmas, there were some additional revelations about the NSA performing additional activities that included compromising systems made by my parent company. And I'm just like, okay, that was really what put me over the edge from this situation sucks to there has to be something we can do about it. And the problem is that when you think about bulk collection and internet surveillance, it really is very similar to the 3 laws of thermodynamics. You can't win, you can't break even, you can't quit the game. I'm not going to give up my Android phone. The other phone OSs are more annoying. I'm not going to stop sending email. I would like to be able to send email securely, but given that 99.999% of the other people I send email aren't, it really wouldn't help me much, So I'm sitting here thinking, there's got to be something that we can do, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm existing in this state of basically bubbling, simmering annoyance until a couple months ago when Edward Snowden spoke at South by Southwest. And he basically crystallized my frustration. When we think about what's happening at the NSA for the past decade, the result has been an adversarial internet, a global free fire zone for governments. It's nothing we ever asked for. It's not what we want, and it's something we need to protect against. So this sounds a hell of a lot like a call to arms to me. As a little bit of background, though, I am not a wizard. Despite the fact that I'm fascinated by cryptography, I am not a cryptologist. I'm a medieval history major. That kind of math is so far beyond, I can balance a checkbook, I'm very pleased with this, but never gonna do cryptology here. And the encryption tools that are available, I'll be honest, are kind of challenging. If you look at some of the interviews with Glenn Greenwald, one of the things that he acknowledges is he blew off Snowden 2 or 3 times when Snowden tried to get in touch with him because Snowden was trying to get him to use encryption technology to protect Snowden's identity and the data. And Greenwald was like, fuck that. That's way too complicated. So what are we actually going to do? I'm the sorcerer's apprentice. There has to be something I can do that doesn't result in a gazillion brooms all trying to fill the well at the same time. So I started looking around, and the first thing I wanted to do was understand the problem. And I'll pause here to say, when I started putting this talk together, my hope was to address surveillance, the entire topic, and I discovered that would take like a week. Not of me researching it, but of me talking to you for a week solid. So I've really tried to narrowly define this as bulk collection of metadata. Metadata is data about data. So if you make a phone call, metadata is the number you called it from, whatever location they can locate, the duration of the call. When you send an email, it's the to address, the from address, possibly the IP addresses associated, whatever path it took, et cetera. And there's a really useful tool made available by The Guardian that lets you help identify the metadata that you generate when you send email, when you use your phone, et cetera. I strongly encourage, I will figure out somewhere to put these slides. I don't know if CarolinaCon can host them or I'll put them online somewhere. But grab this deck because every slide in here that points to a resource, the URL for that resource is in the speaker notes. So everything that's in here, if you pull the deck down, you can play with it yourself. So metadata is the narrow scope that I figured out that I could actually fit into a 45 or 50-minute talk. And the reason that metadata is interesting, people are saying, well, we don't collect the content, we don't listen to your phone calls, like that makes this bulk collection okay. And it really doesn't, because there's a great article or essay out there, great exercise that this guy, Kieran Healy is a professor at Duke, and he looked at information about Paul Revere. He took a data set that was basically the names of people who were active at the time in different Whig parties, in different Whig organizations fighting the British, and using only a set of, I think it was about 250 names and the different groups they were in. He did different types of analysis on this data, and you can see, he walks you through the process. Paul Revere shows up at the center of multiple analyses of just this set of names cross-referenced with the different groups they're in. So if the British had been able to do this, we might all be drinking tea right now. So metadata can be pretty critical. And the challenge is, it's taken a long time for us to even understand what is being collected. Because initially, Ron Wyden in 2012 asked James Clapper whether there was any bulk collection being done against Americans. And Clapper in Congress said, no, sir, not wittingly. So basically, he flat-ass lied to Congress. And later, when he got called on it and had to backpedal, the explanation was, well, we don't consider it collection if we capture the information and store it. We only consider it to be collected if an analyst then actually goes and does something with it. Now, I don't know about you, but Humpty Dumpty, when I use a word, it means what I intend it to mean, nothing more and nothing less. This sounds like a bunch of bullshit. And now that they've been called on their bullshit and they're acknowledging that what they're doing, yes, is really collection, we're finding out that they want to collect everything. Not only do they want to collect data on non-Americans, not only are they collecting data on Americans talking to people outside the US, but they're just collecting, they're vacuuming up everything that they can. And what pisses me off even more about this is none of this is being discussed. There's no debate. Everything we know about this has come from leaks and has been extracted from them kicking and screaming. So we're not having a conversation about the suspicionless seizure of the information, about everything that we do digitally today. It's being imposed on us, some of it by laws that we aren't even allowed to know. Now let's stop and think about that. There's a secret law that we can't know that there's a secret law allowing secret collection of our data that we're not allowed to know that they're collecting. Does this sound like a free country to you? It's not what I signed up for. So the problem is, not only are they collecting this data, but this data can be used in a number of ways that can be abusive. The gentleman who made this statement, Michael Hayden, to be fair, this is a little bit sensationalist because he said, we kill people based on metadata, but not Americans. Ooh, number one, if I lived anywhere outside of the US, excuse me, fuck you. And number two, that's what he's saying today. We already know that rogue elements in the law enforcement organizations have been abusing this data to look up celebrities and love interests, et cetera. And we already know that information has been gathered on prominent Muslims to look for ways to embarrass them if they step out of line, I guess. So the fact that this collection of information exists bothers me, because it's not what you're doing with it today, even though I'm not okay with that. It's what are you going to do with it in the future? If you decide down the road that something I'm doing is illegal, are you then going to retroactively go back through everything you've collected on me and look for evidence that I was doing it today? I'm not okay with that either. The number of things that I'm not okay with is growing rapidly, right? So the problem is, it doesn't really matter how pissed off I am. And my goal here is, number one, to piss you off too. If you are not pissed off at this point, then you're not paying attention, in my opinion. But number two, I want to do something about this. And I'm fucking tired of clicking links and signing online petitions, oh my God, and tweeting about my outrage. I mean, I'm doing that anyway, but I'd like to do something a little more constructive about it. So I started looking around and I said, what is feasible for me to do today to deal with this, to try to opt out of it, to make it harder? One of the problems with the definition of privacy in the US is that the legal definition of privacy is based on a term, reasonable expectation of privacy. What the fuck does that mean? You know, privacy is a slippery slope. If you give up your right to privacy in one area, that changes the definition that is applied in the law. If you say it's okay for surveillance cameras to be put in all public places, then you have now lost the right to go unobserved in a public location. The legal definition of privacy varies as the cultural definition varies, which means you and I have the power, and in my opinion, the responsibility to pay attention to this and to actively push back against these invasions of our privacy. So, a little annoyed here, gonna see what I can do, kind of feeling like that toddler, I'm gonna sit here and wave my tiny fists and tell you this is not all right. It turns out there are two things, there's a minimum of two things that you can do. I want every person in this room to go home tonight and do this if you aren't doing this already. There is no reason not to do this. If I had ultimate power in this area, I would make it so that no computing device could connect to the World Wide Internet without these two things being applied to it. No web browser would run without HTTPS everywhere. So this is a browser plugin from the EFF, and it does one simple fucking thing. If a website is available encrypted, then it makes your communication to it encrypted. This is a no-brainer. Every browser should do this by default, but they don't. So thanks, EFF. They gave us a tool to do this. Let's put this on our computers, and let's then go put it on our relatives' computers, and our boyfriend or girlfriend's computers, and the computers at the goddamn library, and the computers everywhere we work. There is no reason that this should not be on every computer in existence, in my personal opinion. The other thing that we can all do is we can stop using Google for search, which has two benefits. Not only do you stop feeding, your traffic through a system that clearly, while they are making steps to keep the NSA out of their business, they are still a giant company that receives demands from the government to turn over their information, and they keep logs, and they track this information because they want to monetize it, so that information is still available when the government comes and asks for it. There are other web browsers out there, there are other search engines out there that don't track you. So I switched to DuckDuckGo 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a little annoying because I actually realized how often I use Google image search. That was really the only thing I missed was Google image search. And fortunately, DuckDuckGo has come out with a new interface that they're beta testing right now that has image search. So poof. I'm really dead serious about this. These two things, everyone who connects to the internet should do this. They're both free. They take 10 seconds to change your damn default search engine and install a browser plugin. Please. That's not all we can do, obviously. But some of the other things that we can do and should do are a little more complicated. So the only reason that this utility isn't in the earlier, the free and easy and no-brainer section is because it's still in alpha. And as soon as they decide that it's fully baked, I'm going to move it to that section. But this is another tool from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And what this does is it basically eliminates tracking cookies, or it makes them no longer usable for tracking your activity around the internet. So when you go to somewhere like Facebook, Facebook puts a cookie in your browser, and then when you go to other sites around the internet, Facebook uses those cookies to see what you're up to. And this is one of the ways that sites determine how to deliver advertisements to you. So if you, for example, I started wondering why I was seeing ads for Scotty Vest everywhere on the internet. And then I realized I had used so we'll get to that in a second. I have multiple web browsers that I use. And I had made a mistake and used a browser that I normally only use for information that I don't want to be tracked or get cookies on in a cookie allowing mode, and bought something off the Scotty Vest website. And for fucking months after that, I was getting Scotty Vest ads on every website I went to. It was amazing to me. It was a clear, visual, tangible readout of what is actually going on under the hood there. So what Privacy Badger does is Privacy Badger basically munges those cookies so the tracker is not there. The other thing that you can do, and again, this is a little more complicated, and clearly it's subject to human failure because I totally screwed it up. Run multiple browsers and use them for different things. If you're going to use Google, install Chrome, and use Chrome for everything Google and use Firefox for everything else. If you're going to use Facebook, use a privacy mode in one of these browsers, use a dedicated browser for it. Run something like NoScript, run something like Privacy Badger, but there are ways to start to break the surveillance, both the corporate surveillance and the government surveillance of all the different things that we do on the net. This is low tech. It's a little harder because you have to remember which browser you use for what. That's kind of a pain in the ass. But doesn't involve installing anything more complicated than another web browser. If you start to really be interested in taking a little more time and digging a little further into your operating system, another thing that you can do is you can install you can change your DNS, configure your DNS to point to a DNS server that doesn't log your DNS queries. So stop and think about the information that's generated in the DNS server that you use. Every URL, every host name, anytime you resolve DNS, that's associated with your IP address and stored somewhere. It doesn't have to be. Reconfiguring DNS is ridiculously easy on most operating systems. Switch to one of the public access OpenNIC DNS servers that doesn't log. And again, these slides will be out, so you don't have to, especially this next slide, which is completely unreadable, so you don't have to track any of this stuff because it's all in the information that'll be online. But the next step you can take, if you're willing, again, to put a little more effort into it, is to stop fucking using Google email. Stop using MicrosoftOutlook.com. Yeah, that gets some applause, thank you. And switch to another email service. You may have to pay $16 a year, $20 a year. There are different email services out there that offer different levels of anonymity, that offer different levels of privacy. They're not that hard to use. But it involves deciding that your privacy is important to you and taking an extra step. What about chat, online chat? I don't use online chat. I'm interrupt-driven enough as it is. If I tried installing an IM client once and I wanted to kill myself by the end of the day. I love you all, and I don't want to talk to you when you want to talk to me. So I haven't actually, this whole deck is built of either things that I want to use or things I already use, except for this. I think this is a fabulous idea. Everyone who uses chat is welcome to it. But my understanding is that this is the simplest, easiest to use of the decently secure private chat clients. And the guy who wrote this, it's interesting because when CryptoCat first came out, there were a bunch of people who dug through it and found some security vulnerabilities and some privacy issues with it and made a big stink about it. And he fixed them. And every time somebody pops up and says, you are doing X wrong, because people like to shit on people who are giving away free tools, go figure, he fixes it. So there is no such thing as a fully secure email service, as LavaBit and Silent Circle have demonstrated. You either can't guarantee that it's secure, or the government shuts you down because you're too secure. There's no such thing as a fully secure chat service. None of these tools are going to be perfect. But you get people who are well-intentioned and working hard and responding to their critics. That's basically all you can ask for at this point. The bigger problem, honestly, there's a ton of options available for me on my laptop. Whether I run Windows or Linux, a Mac is a little harder because Apple locks up your operating system a little worse, but still mostly everything we've talked about you can do regardless of your desktop OS. My phone is my lifeline to the net. I travel probably 75% for business. At this point, my phone could only be more actively in my hand if it was grafted there. I use my phone while I'm sitting on the tarmac. I use my phone while I'm sitting at the gate. I use my phone in the taxi to the hotel. I use my phone in the hotel all evening. I read most of my corporate email on the phone. I answer most of my corporate email on the phone unless I actually have to type more than a paragraph and then the tiny little keyboard gets annoying. I'm on Twitter constantly. If you need to find me, adding me on Twitter may possibly be the fastest way to get a response from me. I read my personal email on my phone. I browse the web on my phone. And none of this shit works on my fucking phone. So my footprint, again, my internet footprint off my desktop, off my laptop, is probably not that bad. On my phone, it's a giant disaster. I would really like, one of the things that I would love to do if I had infinite free time and a bunch of bored friends, to put together some kind of tool that would let you see your internet footprint the way that you can go out and connect to websites that will let you see your carbon footprint. Except that I don't want to know what my internet footprint is on my phone. So I've started looking at this, and there are actually web browsers for Android that are less sucky, and private text. I use TextSecure now. TextSecure is the way that encrypted text messaging ought to work. With TextSecure, when you text other people who don't have TextSecure, it just works like an SMS client. Works fine. If you text someone else who has TextSecure, it will give you a prompt to do a key exchange. You can exchange keys, and then from then on, it works just like another text messaging client, but it encrypts it in the background. There's not a lot of fucking around required. To the point where I got Mike, my partner, doing this, and maybe 3 or 4 months ago, we were up in DC, we were trying to send messages back and forth, and of course, it is the one time that we really need to be able to communicate with each other by text message, and the damn thing lost its session keys. And so we had to resync our session, and we finally figured out where we were, and he handed me my phone, and he said, "You fix it, this was your idea." And so I spend like 3 minutes, and I get the session keys resynced, and I hand him his phone back, and he's like, "God damn it, I don't understand why I have to sync sessions to send text messages." And I said, I was just thinking, what a miracle it is that we've been sending encrypted text messages to each other back and forth for a year, and this is the first time we've had to touch the underlying infrastructure. So you can look at it as 5% of the time it's really, really annoying. Not even 5%, that's way too high. Once a year, it's really, really annoying, and the rest of the time you don't even realize it's there. This is how encryption should work. If encryption for email worked like this, everybody would use encrypted email. Yeah, exactly. I have not yet gotten to the stage of using Red Phone for private calls. And again, there's no real reason I haven't. I use my phone for work. I need to be reachable by phone. They kind of get annoyed when I'm not. So I kind of feel like it'd be a little bit of a big step, and I'm kind of scared of it. And this right here is where encryption and privacy become, everybody has the sticky point. Everybody has, let's do all the things that are easy, but there's a different point along this spectrum where everybody gets stuck or gets scared, and this is mine, I'll be honest. And so my goal is, by the time I give this talk again, to be able to say, yeah, and I started using Red Phone because I was embarrassed to have to admit in front of a crowd at CarolinaCon that I didn't, and so stay tuned. So everything that I've talked about so far is what I would consider reasonably easy. Now, what I consider reasonably easy after a year of caring about, actually, so show of hands. Who in the room thinks that the things that I've talked about so far look like something that you would consider doing in general? Dude, or done, thank you. Just for those not in the back, everybody, I mean, pretty much every hand in the room went up. That is awesome. Thank you. So now I don't feel like quite so much of an outlier. The problem is, I'm talking to you guys. I'm not talking to a tech journalist or the admin at my company or the librarian at my local library. These are the people that I want to reach. These are the people that I need to get the previous message to. The rest of this is for you guys who are here with me. This is the next bridge to cross. So, Aviator web browser. There is actually a secure web browser for the desktop. I will tell you that I installed it on Windows when it first came out, and it was a pain in the ass, and I stopped using it. I had trouble getting pages to load. There were some things that I couldn't do. I'm not real happy about that. I want to give it another try. You know, it was that security versus convenience spectrum. It didn't make it for me. But what I hope to do is to keep trying it again every 3 months until either the functionality improves or my tolerance for being a little inconvenienced to be more secure improves, and I can switch to it as my primary browser. It's still installed. I'm just not doing much with it. The next step, and this is something I've done, the funny thing is, of everything on this list, this is the one I've done for the longest. If you email me after this talk, your email will go to a Linux server in my basement. That Linux server is, or actually up until like 4 or 5 years ago, it was a 486. I swear to God, because all it has to do is chuck email back and forth and a few web pages. And we did actually upgrade off the 486. But my phone, my 3-year-old Android phone, has a faster CPU than my mail server. This is not, you know, this is not hard. You don't have to have an expensive fast box for this. And Ars Technica has a fantastic overview of how to run your own email server, how to set up your own domain, all the hoops you have to jump through. Now this definitely comes with a few more usability issues. First of all, day to day, if my power goes out at my house, my email is down. And I don't know about you guys, but you know, Duke Energy, not perhaps the most reliable in my neighborhood. You can deal with this. You have a backup MX, you have other people doing backup storage for your email. So we had a backup MX in Cary, and we had a friend of ours with a box in Blacksburg or whatever. And then there was that big storm last fall that took out the entire damn East Coast. I did not have geographic diversity in my backup MX. This kind of sucked. So now we've switched to paying Dyn DNS for backup MX, and they are, I assume, more geographically diverse than me and 3 of my friends backing each other up. So, you know, these are things that you don't think about until your email's running on a Linux server in your basement. Oh, by the way, my entire family's on it, so the way that I know that the power's out at my house when I'm traveling is my father calls me and says he can't get his email. Sorry, Dad. So, but again, this is, you know, most people don't need to do this, to be honest. The reason I did this years ago was because actually I had the domain, and I was running it on a box under my desk at work, and the company I was at went under. And it was easier for me to put it in my basement and figure out how to get it routed correctly than to figure out how to buy email service and set up a domain there. So this was the path of least resistance, you know, 10 years ago, 11, 12, 13 years ago. And now, one of the other advantages to running your own email server is, this is not an advantage I ever intend to take any advantage of, I hope, but if the feds ever want to confiscate my email at the server, I will fucking know about it, because they will have to fucking come to my house. You know, they can't go to Google and say, give me all of this person's email for the last 5 years. We'll get to the challenge there in a minute, but there are actually some benefits legally to running your own email server in your own house, because data that is in your house is protected differently under the law than data in the cloud. So this is another one of those things where I poked at this, I got it working, I kind of said, you know, this is really not worth the effort it takes. But Tor is an anonymity tool, and it allows you to basically obfuscate your source for where you are browsing the web from. So if there are things that you are doing that you would like not to be traceable back to your house or your account at your internet provider, Tor is a really good tool. It's a way to, again, keep your web browsing habits private. Going back to the phone topic, Black Phone is an Android-based phone that doesn't have the disadvantages of stock Android, that they've tried to make this as secure as possible and as private as possible. So you are not subject to a lot of the challenges with the default Google apps of Google basically knowing everything that you're doing. If you are interested in a hardened smartphone, this is probably the easiest way to get one. It's not cheap, but you can buy a Black Phone, and the defaults on the Black Phone, instead of spraying your information out into the void, will be to protect your information as much as possible. If you don't have, $500 to drop on a phone, the other option is to roll your own hardened Android device. And so this is a how-to, basically, for taking an Android device and making it as secure as is feasible today. If you are interested in that topic, then I encourage you to come to Splattspace in Durham this coming Monday. So, Techno-Activism Third Mondays is a meetup for nerds like me and you and Mauricio and Sean and other people in the audience that I know will show up. So the idea is we get together once a month, and instead of bitching about these things, we educate ourselves on them and we do stuff about it. The topic this coming Monday is hardening Android. I have a Google Nexus 7. I know that other people also intend to bring Android devices. And I've known about this blog post since it was posted in April. I didn't touch it because it's actually pretty complicated. You have to reflash your phone, and then you have to install CyanogenMod, and then you have to install F-Droid, and then there's a bunch of packages to install, a bunch of configuration. I don't know. No, I'm not going to brick my phone. Thank you very much. But the reason I'm not going to brick my tablet is because I'm going to do it with a bunch of my friends. And so hopefully, before I brick my phone, one of them will say, hey, that actually looks like a bad idea. Maybe you should read the instructions first. So my theory is that all of us are smarter than one of us, especially when that one of us is me. And that if we're all doing it together on different devices, that we can all help each other out. So Splattspace in Durham this coming Monday, 7:15 to 9:15. The reason it's 7:15 is that the parking deck is free after 7 o'clock, so we want to let people park for free. And that is a different time than before, which is why I'm calling this out. Bring a phone if you want to, bring a tablet, or if you don't want to, come and watch us brick our phones, or not brick them. So there's a ton of other things that you can do on your phone, on your desktop OS, in general, in your network and infrastructure. This is just scratching the surface, and it's barely scratching the surface at that. The most useful website I've found for ideas, for things that you can do, is a site called Prism Break. And this is where people have put together a huge list, kind of an intimidating huge list. I think you pointed me at this months ago. And I went to it at first, and I'm like, holy shit, I will never get through, be able to do all of this. And the point is, we don't have to do all of it. If we do any of this, we're ahead of the game. If you walk out of here and all you do is install HTTPS everywhere and DuckDuckGo, you are that much more protected against bulk collection that day. Take a step, take one step, take a baby step. Or go as far as you can and then poke me and say, hey, I'm stuck on X. If you want to talk to me about setting up an email server, that's great. I might talk to you about what you're using Tor for and how to make it actually function in my life. If we talk to each other, we can do this. The problem is there's no silver bullet here. There's flaws with all of these approaches. One of the biggest is, and again, this is the topic that I care the most about at this point, my damn email. So I run my own email server, and I've figured out the power issues, and I've figured out the backup MX, and I've figured out geographic diversity, and one of these days I will, actually stop using Pine. But it doesn't really matter because everyone I fucking email is on Gmail. So they have all these conversations anyway. This is a great blog post. This guy went through And he actually did frequency analysis for the Gmail servers on something like 10 years of his inbox. And
instead of subpoenaing your email, they have to subpoena every single person their email on email if your email is not attached.
that's a fabulous point. So the point that was just made is that instead of subpoenaing my email, one person, they would have to subpoena the email from everyone I correspond with to get all of my email. So that's still, that assumes, that they're not just hoovering it up between data centers. But yes, if they are actually following the legal requirements, then there is still some protection here.
No, that's still one subpoena to Gmail for all of yours. It's still just one subpoena.
So, and still one subpoena to Gmail for everything I send, probably. But for everyone who's sent to me, I don't know. I don't know how the law works there. Still one subpoena?
It would be anything related to you.
Yeah. So basically, we're still a little screwed. But what he found was that about half of his email went through Google. So okay, they'll only get half my damn email. And honestly, if that's all I can get, I'll take it. It's still better than them getting all of it. Another problem here, and I had one more slide in here, which I hid because someone was concerned about me showing classified information and them having to do a lot of paperwork. So when you go pull the deck down, it will have redacted slides. If you want a clean deck that doesn't have them so you don't have to do paperwork, email, and I'll send you that too, blah, blah, blah. However, the redacted slide was about some information that Greenwald just put up indicating that the FBI had basically worked with Microsoft to backdoor Skype and Outlook.com and everything to basically be able to remove the encryption as needed. So even if you're using tools like Skype that say they're encrypted, you don't know if somebody's cut a deal with the feds to let them read it. And at a larger level, okay, so you're encrypting your email. Great. They'll just crack your PC. I mean, how many of us truly believe that if the feds wanted to read my email, they couldn't just compromise my laptop or my phone? So again, none of this is a guarantee. It's just incremental steps. And one thing we can do is these guys, Bits of Freedom, they sent letters to the major, like 14, 15 of the major antivirus vendors and asked, have you been approached by any government or done anything to whitelist government malware in your antivirus? So in other words, the idea here is the government is approaching antivirus vendors to say, we want you not to detect the things that we're using to compromise these laptops. And it's really instructive to look at who replied and who didn't. So a lot of the smaller antivirus vendors like F-Secure, et cetera, they replied and said no, and if the government asked us to do that, we would tell them to go jump. Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro, suspiciously silent. Oh, sorry. Okay, there was another one of the big ones. Sorry, thank you for catching that. Trend Micro did respond. There was another one of the big ones who didn't. The full list is off this link. And I would say, if you care about these things, switch to an antivirus vendor that said, we don't work with the feds. So after sort of going through this process of getting pissed off, thinking there was nothing I could do, and then thinking I'd go figure out what I could do, I proposed 3 laws of counter-surveillance. You can't prevent surveillance. It's everywhere. It's the background radiation of the internet right now. But you can make it harder, and there are ways to limit what they can get. Snowden again, same talk. The bottom line, repeated this again and again, is that encryption does work. We need to think of encryption not as this sort of arcane black art. It's a basic protection, a defense against the dark arts for the digital realm. When you install HTTPS everywhere, you're leveraging encryption to protect your information. It's that simple. So we've talked about a lot of technological solutions here. Everybody's familiar with the 7-layer OSI model. Let's talk for a minute about layer 8, the politics layer. So of all of the people working in this space, you'll notice I come back to the EFF again and again. One of the things that they do is they give a pretty good scorecard for who protects your data versus who just rolls over and hands it over. If you're making choices about what software to use, if you have any influence over what to purchase, or if you're deciding what to use on your personal activities, this is a pretty good list to look over. You know? I don't think, I can tell you, I don't personally make decisions based solely on this, but if there's 2 products I can use and one of them rates better on this list than another, that will be the influencer for me. And there's a number of groups working in this area. The ACLU, EPIC, the EFF, the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, Center for Democracy and Technology. If we support these guys, they do the heavy lifting for us. They have the lawyers, they have the lobbyists, they have the people who are fighting at layer 8 to do what we're trying to do at layer 7. And one of the results is Congress is actually starting to take an interest in this. Now, this is a really interesting case, the USA Freedom Act. There have been a number of different acts that have been proposed, bills in Congress. Some of them have been really good. Basically, anything with Zoe Lofgren's name on it is pretty good, and some of them have sucked a bunch. And the USA Freedom Act, like any successful bill, is somewhere in the middle. It is basically, it started out being a fairly strong statement, then it got watered down a bunch to get consensus and pass. So what's happening in the legislature is what always happens, which is that somebody starts out with a good intention and then it gets watered down. But at least people are paying attention. This, again, it's not going to solve things. It's not going to fully solve anything. It is fatally flawed in a number of ways. But at least they're awake. At least they're doing something. So another area at layer 8 is internet governance. How many people saw Ian Goldberg speak on privacy at ShmooCon? About a dozen in the room. So when the ShmooCon 2014 talks are posted, I think they wait some months before they post them so that people, they're up? Okay, I went looking last week and I didn't see them, so maybe it was, Yay, thank you, that's what I did wrong. So I went looking on the website, they're not there, they're posted at archive.org. Thank you, go home and watch Ian Goldberg's talk on privacy because it's badass. And one of the things that he said was the IETF should never again approve a protocol that sends plain text over the internet. The IETF is waking up too. So this is a best current practice RFC that just came out this month. Pervasive monitoring is an attack. And basically, it's a statement of principle saying, let's fix this. We run the internet. What can we do about this? So, one last Snowden quote. They are setting fire to the future of the internet. The people who are in this room now, you guys are all the firefighters, and we need you to help us fix this. He said this to the audience at South by Southwest. I say it to you now. We are the firefighters. If all you do is go home and start using DuckDuckGo or HTTPS everywhere or multiple web browsers or text secure, you are a firefighter. And I will leave you with one last activity to consider, which is there is a group that is the usual suspects that is working on a Reset the Net Day. On June 5th, they are doing, you know, the SOPA PIPA blackout web pages, raise awareness, call your congressman, and they're also releasing a privacy pack, which is a number of the tools that I've talked about, free and easy to use tools to raise awareness and to help people to take these steps on a larger basis. You can become a teacher very easily. If all you do is sit down next to your coworker and say, hey, have you used DuckDuckGo? You are fighting this fire. We can do this together. Any questions? like and it your is comment being jerks about it. And there have been people who've reported bugs in CryptoCat in a nice, normal, sane, helpful way, and Nadim fixes those too. But he doesn't have to deal with all the bullshit that is associated with it. So I'm not at all downplaying the need to report flaws. I'm just really wishing that people weren't dicks.
I'll just say, if you look at the groups that are sort of focused on, I don't know what you want to call it, social impact of technology, the unwillingness to receive that feedback is on a par with major software vendors.
Fair.
And actually, the major software vendors might be better.
So in groups that are focused on these kinds of technology, the unwillingness to receive feedback can be on a par with the major software vendors, and the major software vendors can actually be better about it. And that is a fair point. It does help when people report bugs if the software creator is not a dick as well.
So among the worst offenders in any form of this data collection have been the major ISPs, particularly ones who own the cellular network. One of the things I didn't see addressed in any of this was your geolocation, which to a cellular provider is just metadata.
Yep, so his point is that one of the major offenders in all of this are the internet service providers, especially the cellular providers, and that I didn't address geolocation, especially for cellular. There's a real simple reason. It's because I don't know what the fuck to do about that. And unfortunately, you can't use a cell phone without the cell tower knowing where you are. That's really going to have to be addressed at layer 8. I think that is one of the few areas where, short of taking the battery out of my phone when I'm not using it, and I'm, again, not willing to do that, and it would still pop me up every time I made a phone call. So sadly, I think we're kind of stuck with that one unless somebody's got a better idea.
One layer 8 to fix would be to not register a cell phone with a social security number and get yourself a $500 business ID. So you can give them a business tax ID instead of your personal cell. And then you could use that business ID to register.
That's a great point. So one layer 8 fix is to not register your cell phone to your personal social security number, but to get a business tax ID. Another option is to get a prepaid burner phone, pay for it in cash.
Still require a social security number.
Really? Fascinating. Okay, I haven't done that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, if you get a T-Mobile prepaid, this was true back in 2012, they will bill you as prepaid user.
So it does sound like you can get a T-Mobile prepaid phone, at least as of 2012, without providing more personal information than just a name.
If you go through Google Voice and get like a burner phone, then you go through Google Voice, which encrypts your IP, and then go through a VPN, not have your...
So the question is, can you get a burner phone and then go through Google Voice, which encrypts your IP, and then get a VPN? And technologically, I'm sure that you could. I think the number of people who would go to those lengths, there's journalists and activists and people who are fighting repressive governments for whom all of that is worthwhile and it's needful. And then there's me. You know, honestly, and the drug, right. Well, and that's a great point. And the drug dealers and the terrorists need this shit too. And frankly, God damn it, you know, unfortunately, there's no way to say only activists and journalists and good guys can have this. We have to build these technologies and know that they're going to be used in ways that we don't like, and it's like any other damn technology.
I worry that...
Sorry.
So, I mean...
I'll get to you, Al.
Yeah, this is like more of a fundamental question than, I guess, a specific technical question, but when you're talking about this stuff, the NSA's official stance is any encrypted traffic is automatically suspicious, and we want to know what's behind it.
Yes.
So, you as an individual, how can you leverage, you know, do I really care about the email
Yes.
I sent to Graham with my vacation pictures on it? Do I really want to be
To get that attention. Right. So The point that you're making is that the NSA has said any encrypted traffic is stored forever. It's automatically interesting. They want to keep it until they can decrypt it, right? And so the question is it worth it? How do I decide whether it's worth it to me to raise that flag, to make my traffic interesting? Is the email I'm sending important enough to get their attention? I think I personally have their fucking attention. You know, I'm imagining that the fact that I'm standing in here, if I don't already, I will, and the fact that I've used Text Secure. If everybody fucking used encrypted email, we wouldn't stand out. Will and then Al, and then I think I'm going to get the hook because of time. Will?
The NSA is only meant to do 3 hops or 5 hops from a US
3 hops.
non-US citizen.
So the NSA is only...
How many non-US citizens are in this room now?
Right, so the NSA is only supposed to collect up to 3 hops from a non-US citizen if they're collecting connections. How many non-US citizens are in this room now? Okay, so a couple. The other thing is there was a conference in San Francisco called TrustyCon. And one of the talks at TrustyCon, this is on YouTube, TRUSTY con, was about 3 hops and the amount of crap data that you get out of 3 hops. He was doing a mathematical proof that 3 hops makes your percentage that you actually care about the person almost unusable. And if they reduced it to 2 hops, the data that they would be getting would be more needles and less haystack. So A, all of us are 1 hop from a non-US citizen, congratulations, you know. And B, the data that they're getting, because they're using this vacuum cleaner, is so poorly targeted to begin with, it would be better for them as well as for us if some of their selection criteria were tighter. Al?
So, I guess this is more of a comment than a question. Do you think that this risks, like, the fact that there's so much surveillance and collection of data around, you know, if we look back at MLK, how the FBI harassed him and all that use of power, do you think that the government having this kind of power actually risks democracy?
So the question is, if you look back at Martin Luther King and how the FBI tried to blackmail him into killing himself with personal information, does this kind of bulk surveillance actually imperil democracy? Personally, I think the thing that's fucking imperiling democracy is the way that money influences politics today. So yeah, I mean, I think...
Yes.
So I absolutely do think that this is an issue for democracy, but at a level of issue, I think it's lost in the noise. So more in the bar because I know they want to start Hacker Jeopardy. Thank you all.